Construction is no stranger to associations, and for good reason. Construction is complicated. It often requires different levels of advocacy and expertise to navigate Ontario's marketplace. Most have one thing in common: their coordinated voice for the industry in an effort to make it better. What changes are the topics they focus on. One of these associations, or councils in this case, is the Construction Employers Coordinating Council of Ontario, and they have a new executive director, Adam Melnick. In this episode of OCS Talks, we are joined by Adam to talk about CECCO and where the council is heading.
Welcome to OCS Talks, your source for all things related to Ontario's unionized ICI construction sector.
I'm Brian Barron, CEO of the Ontario Construction Secretariat, and welcome to the podcast. Adam, how are you?
I'm great, Brian, and thanks. I really appreciate the invitation and opportunity to be here, and congrats on the continued success for OCS Talks. It's become a pretty important space for thoughtful conversation regarding industry.
So, Adam, most of our listeners are familiar with CECCO under Wayne Peterson's leadership. And before we get too far into the podcast, I would like to take a moment to thank Wayne for his leadership at CECCO, but also his unwavering commitment to the industry. I don't know too many people who have that level of commitment to construction. So I'm grateful for his participation on our board, and then also for his mentorship when it came on to the OCS. It was really sort of invaluable in that labor relations space. So I do want to wish him all the best I believe this is his second retirement, probably heading towards his third retirement at some point as well. I'm not sure that guy will ever stop. But I did want to acknowledge that anyway. So, with that, Adam, even though most people are probably familiar with CECCO, if you could just briefly run us through what CECCO's mandate is, just to kind of set the stage, I think that'd be a great place to start.
Sure, Brian. Thanks for that. Yeah, and I'm very fortunate to have Wayne available, and I'm grateful that he doesn't have the aspiration to go too far, so I know he'll still be a phone call away. At the core, CECCO exists to be the collective voice of the unionized construction employers in Ontario's ICI sector. Our mandate is to coordinate, align, strengthen employer perspectives on labor relations, collective bargaining, workforce development, and public policy. What makes CECCO unique, though, is that it doesn't replace sector associations. In fact, our goal is to bring them together. We focus on the issues that are bigger than any one trade or association, where coordination, shared strategy truly matter. Ultimately, CECCO's role is about stability, predictability, long-term success for Ontario's unionized construction industry, for employers, workers, and the economy as a whole.
It's kind of one of the interesting things that I like about this industry is that there are these coordinating bodies that kind of help to take some of those roles and really help to, fix some of those large, I don't want to call them systemic problems, but some of these issues that really require sort of this bigger level of advocacy on behalf of many kind of things. So I think that's pretty fantastic. Now, you've got sort of a bit of an interesting background because you didn't really come from the employer side. You came from the union side. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and, kind of what your career looked like, and then ultimately, why you were interested in coming over to CECCO? Yeah,
no, thanks for that, Brian. Like a lot of people, I didn't really start with a master plan. In fact, mine actually just started on a job site. At a variety of different things that happened in life, but fundamentally, everything kind of took off when I became an apprentice. I came up through the trades at a heat and frost insulator apprentice here in Ontario. And for over 2 decades now, I hate saying that because I like to try to hold on to my youth, but the reality is after over 2 decades, I've had the opportunity to work across apprenticeship training, workforce development, labor relations, government relations, and ultimately industry partnerships. The bulk of these years with the heat and frost insulators at a variety of levels, the Insulators Union provided me some pretty interesting opportunities that allowed me to work internationally, nationally, provincially, and locally. Everything kind of sat, and all my work has always sat at the intersection between labor, employer, and government. And so I've always been in that space collectively. What drew me to CECCO is that exact intersection. So CECCO's very uniquely positioned when I think look at the fact about bringing the employer leadership together in a way to support bargaining, effective workforce development, strategies related to advocacy, and then, of course, actually building a bigger, incredible advocacy. Really at the core of that as well, though, is focusing on the integrity of the unionized model. It's been paramount in building Ontario's ICI sector, and that'll be the core point working forward with CECCO. And that's exciting because the unionized construction industry has provided me with everything I've had the opportunity to experience, all the opportunities I've had in this province, and beyond. And so it's at that intersecting point with my skills and experiences, I just look to the opportunity to give back. And to be honest, working on both sides, working with both groups, employer and labor, there's so much in common. There's so many commonalities. There's so many shared goals and visions. It's a strength I've always gravitated towards, working with my labor management table when I was the director of apprenticeship, and then of course into the GR advocacy piece. You're more effective in your advocacy when you're doing it collaboratively. And that kind of lends itself to with CECCO being in this unique role with all these associations that it, make up its membership that have individual agendas, but there's some larger wide scale advocacy that can be taken up by CECCO. And that excites me to take that position and take some leadership around that.
Well, that's great. I think, I think you've got sort of a unique perspective and a unique opportunity when you look at it from that sort of background, and something that we try to capitalize on in our own fundamentals of construction labor relations class, because we turn around and we very much believe in it being sort of that joint experience. We've got people coming in from both sides, from the union and from the employer, hopefully to give some insight as to some of the challenges and even some of the opportunities that each party sees, and then give a bit of perspective. So when we're at the bargaining table, it's kind of like, hey, yeah, no, I know kind of what they're going through. I know what some of their, what their pressures are from the other side. So I think that positions it pretty well from a CECCO perspective to be able to kind of say, hey, you know what, I do know what that other party goes through, which I think is valuable perspective, when we take a look at that.
I think you're right. There's an interesting dynamic, and it goes both ways. Like, I think about the relationships I've had with a variety of employers, and we know that the construction, and even the large majority of ICI construction, is made up for small to medium-sized firms. A lot of those firms, regardless of the trade, are often started by folks who went through an apprenticeship or were working on those respective tools. So they were the worker, they ultimately became the employer, taking on the challenges and risk associated to operating that company. That dual perspective has been a huge advantage in the relationship between labor and management, both at a job site level and at a larger association organizational level. I'm hoping to bring that same type of lens and experiences when I take the thought process between being an apprentice, but also working in the apprenticeship, working inside those various modalities inside of the industry, with a few different groups along the way as well. And in fact, I did a little bit of work supporting government around their apprenticeship strategy, which was a really interesting lens to take when you work into the weeds on that. And your experience coming out of government, what it's like to have that full spectrum of stakeholders working with you to try to weed through some common goals. And I think there's really great opportunity with CECCO to do the same things, regardless of the partners. I think the more variety of partners actually will help strengthen the advocacy and the bigger vision we're looking to achieve on some of those points.
Well, I think it's, I honestly think it's probably the only way forward, right? Just taking that balanced approach. I mean, if you've got one side of the agenda being advanced without sort of the other kind of thing, you've got, very clear situations where there's winners and losers kind of thing. And I think in these sorts of situations where both can come out, ahead, or at the very least looking at sort of like a logical progression kind of thing going forward, that's really where we all want to be, right? So it's having that balanced perspective on things. So, yeah. Now I've seen, so you forwarded through to me sort of a bit of your strategy framework and that kind of thing for the organization, and appreciating that, you're just coming into this kind of thing. And I certainly don't want, I think that the popular phrase right now is kind of drinking from the fire hose, but I think it's easy to fall into that sort of thing. But can you walk us through like what maybe your top 3 priorities where you see sort of that biggest area of opportunity kind of thing? What do those look like for you in this new role?
Oh, thanks. Yeah, drinking from the fire hose is putting it politely. And in respect to trying to narrow things down, I appreciated sharing my operational plan with you. And I've shared it with folks across CECCO as well. And I suspect it's going to have some deviations over the calendar year, because just as communication increases, engagement increases. And of course, when we think about advocacy and government, things are changing under rapid pace these days, and always kind of does. So there's always going to be some pivoting in there. But when I think about kind of like those 3 big areas, when we were talking about this between you and I kind of think about, we've got a really strong foundation. And so my vision is to kind of build upon that. Wayne, the executive committee, the board, the council, everyone's done some great things, and CECCO has done a lot in the past 9 years and had some great progress forward. Because CECCO's been around since the 70s, right? And it's had like its ebbs and flows. And there's a really unique opportunity here, I think, to carry forward on this foundation, this opportunity, kind of sharpen CECCO's role as a strategic convener. So I'm thinking about these as kind of my three big areas. So first, it's the deeper coordination around labor relations and bargaining intelligence. Ensuring the employers are well informed, they're aligned where appropriate. It's not always going to be simple, but there are things where alignment makes sense, and that helps the industry at large. And essentially be prepared in a complex, increasingly complex environment, particularly with these bargaining cycles. We've seen changes and impact through things like social media and communication amongst folks outside of bargaining, and we've seen the impact. And there's other things that continue to trickle into impacting bargaining in new ways. And the idea CECCO I hope to have here is that between coordination and bargaining intelligence, we can help support and shield those impacts, that negative impacts that could potentially derail or reduce the effectiveness of the folks sitting at the table and the work they're trying to do. Second, workforce development. I think this is key for the industry. I think it's key for all industries in this day and age. And this isn't just about recruitment, though. There's conversations around retention and completion, long-term sustainability, thinking forward. This means continuing to support those joint labor management solutions that actually work on the ground. Coming from background or apprenticeship training, I've seen the success that the joint labor management apprenticeship training has. It's very unique. I taught briefly in the post-secondary world. I saw the difference, what was happening and how it operates. And I'm not here to cast shade on anybody. I just want to, I think, elevate and propel forward the effectiveness that happens in this joint training. I mean, you have that real world connection point to employment. It's active employment while you're being trained, and you're being trained with current techniques that need to be applied, because the employers, they're there to say, this is what we're bidding. This is the scope and the scale, and these are the applications, and these are the materials. And the training centers are responding to that in real time. And they're working with things that are specific to the sector, specific to jobs, major projects, etc. Innovations happen on a job site, and they'd be responded to in the training classroom jointly, collectively, and everyone's paying together to support that. It's wild when you think about how it fundamentally works. And it is so key to, I think, the long-term success we've had and the future we're headed in. Not everyone wants to be a tradesperson, so there's a whole dynamic around this. But it's that joint table, that labor management table, and the effectiveness it has in this model and supporting apprenticeship training from start to finish and beyond, because we see a lot more of that now as well. I think it's key, and there's opportunities and insights that CECCO can help support around that, particularly around advocacy. And with that, my third pillar, my third kind of, I don't know, we want to umbrella, because they're getting pretty big underneath these umbrellas, would be advocacy, right? Talking about a clear, credible story to government, all levels of government, why Ontario's unionized construction sector delivers stability, safety, and value. And I like to kind of frame this around, like, it has to be central to infrastructure delivery. Now, in my experience, though, this type of advocacy, it kind of has a two-pronged approach. It has an internal and external. Because I think in the sector, whether it be the ICI sector, whether it be energy, sewer, everybody else, just construction at large, and I could probably talk about this, but industrial, et cetera, we do a lot of communication silos. So there's a lot of great things out there if you scour the social media channels of a lot of the associations, be it employer or labor, even post-secondary. Like, you look at all these channels and people are pushing through these pieces, and they're very linear in fashion. They get on a road and they drive fast, they drive furiously, they drive, as expensive as they can spend money. And, there is opportunity to spend a lot of money when it comes to communications and push. But the reality is it starts to get further and further away from the collective messaging that makes a lot of sense. And when that messaging is kind of in line and shared, and we have opinions and perspectives of it, but there's some shared commonalities, that's where we get the echo. That's where we get the impact. That's where we get the eyes and the ears, and people will tune into everybody's messaging, and they might find one's more favorable than the other, but the consistency around that is kind of important. So there's a key component when I think about the advocacy, both internal and external. it's kind of like helping people be on the same message or understand that there's messaging that's helpful to be on together. That's probably a better way to put it. Not looking to direct folks. It's maybe to highlight also the opportunities that, become, I don't want to use the word viral, but they become popular. They become easier to amplify. They help echo across, wider audiences than you were before. And that's a big piece around that. And nothing is derailing as walking in to perform advocacy when messages are not somewhat aligned, or at least similar fashion. Don't have to be speaking or singing the same song with the exact same lyrics, but in general, we need to be kind of in a similar realm when we're having these conversations, because as soon as we have discrepancies, it's hard for the audience you're talking to put energy into dissecting which is which. And once you do that, you've lost interest. Time is key, and there's a lot of messaging coming from a lot of different folks these days in a variety of ways. So, having that collaborative approach, having consistency around it. And sometimes you have to say it over and over again, a lot and a lot and a lot. I came from a trade that not a lot of people knew what a heat and frost insulator was. I spent 20 years constantly explaining what that was over and over again. And we have people that change in government, you got to start all over again. And so coming to CECCO, I suspect another large acronym, I'll be doing the same thing over and over constantly. And sometimes you even have to do that to the people who actually participate with your association. It happens. It's a reality. That's something I'm sure you've already come across with OCS on occasion.
Well, so it's kind of interesting. So on those 3 points, right? Like, I mean, we're coming out of a very successful bargaining year. We didn't have any work stoppages, and I'm not trying to suggest that there weren't some pain points, because any negotiation is going to have those. But bottom line is we did successfully navigate that, and I think in large part by folks really kind of understanding that, yeah, you know what, they want to negotiate for, it's going to sound corny, but sort of the greater good. We're really trying to sort of understand how to keep the industry going forward, kind of thing. And I think there was a lot of really positive steps in moving that forward. There was a lot of people who became very educated. They really understood what they needed to do, and they did it jointly between labor and management, so that they were having productive conversations and that sort of stuff. So from that perspective, I think there's a lot of runway for you to kind of continue down that path and trying to really increase that capacity, the knowledge, that sort of stuff, which is fantastic. But then even when we take a look at that labor management side of things, the training, the technology, all those other pieces, that is where I really see the union advantage coming out strong. When I first came into the OCS, I went around to a number of the training facilities and kind of went around. And in my prior life with the government, I had some awareness of what happened, but not really in depth. And I saw the number of really unique ways that they approach training that meet the learner's needs and that sort of stuff. And they were labor and management together. They were jointly funded, and really trying to make sure that the workers coming out of those, whether it's the apprenticeship, whether it's even just retraining or continuous training, that kind of stuff, it was really a strong effort towards making sure that those workers leave those facilities with job ready information and skills, so that they are really reflecting what's happening in the real world, and they've got kind of the best knowledge and experience out there. And then when we take a look at really kind of how all of that sort of stuff works together, I think that is the advantage. I think that's the piece that, like when we're advocating for the industry and we're talking to governments, we're talking to investors, we're talking to all those other pieces, it's what is kind of that union advantage. And there's just so many pieces that, honestly, I think we probably lost sight of over the years, right? Like when we look at kind of that low bid mentality that's out there, where it's everybody's just looking to save a buck. Well, that doesn't get you quality construction. That doesn't get you on time, on budget, that kind of stuff. What it gets you is probably some lawsuits further down the line kind of thing, and a whole lot of problems. So when we're advocating for that sort of thing, it's really being able to clearly show what that advantage is and where we're different, and there is a significant difference that's there as well.
Oh yeah. You're making me think so when I started construction, I'm not from a generational construction family. I'm from a household. My dad was a labor union president quite young in the auto sector. But I had no background in the skill trades whatsoever. I mean, I couldn't read a tape measure. I walked on a job site and that wasn't a skill set I even possessed. And there's a huge risk taken by that employer, obviously, to have a fresh start, green person on the job site. But this is back in the early 2000s, and apprentices were needed, particularly for a lot of the trades that aren't as well known. So electrical, carpentry, plumbing, etc. The ones that you talk to somebody on the street, they can quickly ramble off. I don't hear the heat and frost insulator, and I don't hear even bricklayer. There's a lot. You can go through this list, and you've come across this, and some of the folks listening here within our network are very aware of that. And that comes with blesses and curses on both sides of that equation of the notoriety of the trade and what people think it takes and what media and television does, etc. But when I think about the any level of inexperience I had, the work that was done both on site by the other journeymen, journey persons, the other apprentices, the supervisor that was on site, and then of course the company owner. It was a small contractor at the time. I think it maybe 7 or 8 employees, so it was a bit of a risk factor to have somebody like me brand new. But the energy that went into that, and I can remember, I still recall that first job and the amount of work that I did and the progressive work I had and the mistakes I made and the things you'll learn. But the interesting part was in that learning environment on the job site, the customer didn't pay the price for my learning. So even when I was learning and making mistakes, we were correcting and fixing as we went. Like we weren't skipping over these things. There's still a quality of product that needed to be delivered, even though we were using the job site as a training ground, which is the benefit of this setup, because labor and management are in this together to train their apprentices, to train the workforce. So that job site that has potential, right, to have poor delivered product, if we're not paying attention and cultivating and growing an apprentice, like a commitment to do that, what could be left behind or put on a job site, like what I would have put on, wouldn't have done anything. And thinking about, it would have made a mess, it would have actually caused problems and damaged systems, etc. Hard to believe that their installation can do that, but it does, and it can. So thinking about that, and thinking about this whole low bid allows that in a lot of cases, like perpetuates that, right? We're trying to put on people that are like, in some cases, inexperience usually equates to lower wages. So I can put lower waged, inexperienced people to help me achieve the outcome of a lower bid. Well, what are you getting in that? You're getting an inferior product of what you bought. And in a lot of cases, this is taxpayer dollars. We think about municipalities in the province. We think about private. These types of impacts can delay all kinds of things, local employment. It can impact local economies, deliverables. Like it gets complicated really, really fast and impactful, all because at the very front end, you're just trying to look at these little cheap options. And in the same sense, in my experience anyhow, I see that workforce doesn't grow and blossom into tomorrow's workforce, tomorrow's journey persons, which is, we've had this whole challenge. You've heard it. I've heard it for 25 years now. I know you've heard it for pretty much your whole career, and it's not going to go away anytime soon on the shortage of folks in the skilled trades. It takes time to grow and cultivate an individual to become a journey person. It takes investment. It takes a commitment. It takes people to make mistakes and get better. And quite frankly, if it wasn't for the commitment of that joint table to grow my apprenticeship, it probably would have been really easy to kick me aside. Like you're talking about someone who was struggling with their employment and no clue what they wanted to do. This wasn't high on the list of things to do, but the culture, the commitment and the partnership commitment that I was exposed to early really has bonded me to this entire sector in this industry. And so where I am today, I'm very, very, very fortunate and very lucky. I'm excited. And I'm looking forward to that continual cycle, trying to give back and help cultivate these root fundamentals, because there's so many shared things that we have between labor and management, which is the backbone of the success we've had in the unionized sector, especially in the ICI sector specifically. But I think that transcends all sectors, to be honest, whether it be power, sewer, residential, etc. That union advantage is real. It's significant. And it has a big impact moving forward. And I hope that the more people hear about that and understand how it actually works versus what they perceive it to operate in, they'll start to understand the value to this. And it's not that it can't be low bid. Sometimes unit advantage actually can be one of the lower prices on a job. It's not impossible, but the scoring metrics need to take a lot more into account than just the price tag. Otherwise, the overruns, the damages, the improperly installed systems, equipment, whatever, all of that is going to cost tenfold. And you're not even turning things on or having access to buildings or beyond, all because you saved a percentage point or two on the front end. You will always pay more on the back end for that. And we experience that in our personal life. So it's always funny when I hear about people doing that in these, whether it be public procurement or any form of procurement. It's like, we know better. We know better. We would buy something from the dollar store. The expectation isn't going to last us 25 years. We know that. We'd be lucky if it lasts us 2 months. We know that. So why we think that doesn't apply to other things always blows my mind a little bit.
So one of the points that you brought up, and I think one of the things that, and coming from my previous world where it was the enforcement of sort of the skilled trades and that sort of stuff. And when I say skilled trades, I ultimately mean compulsory trades. So ones where, you've got electricians, plumbers, crane operators, sheet metal mechanics, air conditioning, that kind of stuff. But there's a whole slew of trades that aren't known as compulsory sort of thing. And what ends up happening is what this translates to when you're not dealing with a unionized environment is it's learning on the job. It's somebody who it's effectively seen as, and I certainly don't mean this in any disrespectful way to anybody who's listening, but the way that translates to an owner later on is, well, they're not skilled labor because that's not compulsory. So what ends up happening is you miss that entire opportunity for an apprenticeship, that mentorship, that somebody looking over kind of the work that they're doing to make sure that it's being done correctly, throughout that process kind of thing. You miss that because it's something that is sort of seen as optional, whereas in the unionized environment, that's not optional. You have to go through that apprenticeship. You do actually kind of, earn your stripes, as it were, kind of thing, to actually be able to perform that work unsupervised kind of thing, or kind of, without that journey person looking over you, because you've achieved kind of that journey person status. You've got that ability to do that, and that's one of the things that, from my perspective, when I look at kind of that union advantage, those are those pieces that we really should be focusing in on from the advocacy, right? Because I'm not sure that everybody sort of understands that. They think about it and sort of say, hey, anything kind of goes if there's not that mandatory C of Q that's there.
Thinking about that, what you said, there's a couple of things I'd love to point to draw attention to. Like, first off, you talk about the missed apprenticeship. Unfortunately, being a heat frost insulator, being one of those trades that sometimes, because we're not compulsory in the province, and that is changing in a few jurisdictions around this country, but that particular trade, in my experience as well there, I recognized an epidemic that happened in, if that's not a compulsory trade, where it's not even that you are how would I put it? You miss an apprenticeship. You're often withheld from one. Your carrot is dangled in front of you, telling you you're going to get an apprenticeship, you're going to get an apprenticeship. And because there's no requirement or regulation to have you, registered in that, and they're trying to get you from generic work, that gets wild. It becomes you often hear referred to in the construction sector, the Wild West. And, they're referring to people just doing anything to try to get to that next foothold to move and advance forward. Because one thing people know is that if I have an apprenticeship, that I'm going to advance an apprenticeship, and an advance an apprenticeship should be tied to raises. Now, in that scenario, you watch these folks fight for these things. They have to go over they fight for that raise, fight for that level, and it's a lot of work on someone as an apprentice while you're trying to learn your trade. I couldn't imagine that because I didn't have the background from skilled trade. So what I needed to learn, I'm very fortunate, I think, with the model that I came through and the model we have today still that we continue to advance. It is there to harbor a great environment, a safe environment for training and growth of an apprentice. I think about now that I'm in this role with CECCO and thinking about the unionized construction employers, that unionized construction model for employers, when I think about the advantage that gives them, right? It gives them access to these highly skilled, well-trained workforce to help support that workforce development that happens on their job sites for tomorrow's worker. It standardizes credentials, health and safety alone. I mean, when I think about the health and safety training that is done in the unionized construction sector, that is non-negotiable. That is done. That is it's paramount. And your background, from Ministry of Labor as an inspector, you understand that exactly what I'm talking about. But having taught in post-secondaries, having been around both countries, but keeping it limited to Ontario and Canada, seeing what happens in different avenues of entry into construction, this really is second to none. I'm sitting here in this role doing this work for none other reason, to be honest with you, than I truly believe in this stuff. Because, life, back to construction, there's opportunities out there. But what I see here and what's happened here, like, I left an international role, right? I was working on both sides of the border. I was at that level within my association. And it made sense to me to come back to help deliver in this space. It matters. The space is so significant and so important. And the work here is so paramount. So coming back to that, though, thinking about that idea for an employer, like an employer being unionized, it reduces that risk, right? It improves their productivity. It gives them an opportunity to support long-term planning which is so difficult in construction as it is already. These things help build stability and predictability. I talked about earlier. Something I know we all lean on OCS quite a bit when we think about data, research, and innovation. So anyhow, I just kind of want to point that out a little bit as we were talking about it, and it really got my head spinning. I try to confine our conversation, Brian. We've talked a few times before getting on, and I've tried to create talking points to pull it a little bit tighter because, one, I'm passionate about this stuff. I care about this stuff. I care about the unionized construction sector. I care about the ICI sector. All the working parts that are there. I just get excited with the opportunity of what's in front of us. It's lots of work. God, lots of work. And we're talking about a lot of new ways of doing things. I mean, the innovations around labor relations training, like the work OCS is doing, and having taken courses here in the province and seeing these efforts trying to happen in a variety of ways. I'm so glad we've kind of pulled it into construction specific, because having taken courses, they're wonderful. They're trying to build, that relationship between labor and management on a variety of issues, to have these collaborative approaches. Which comes with challenges, and that way, essentially can help build strengthened relationship at the bargaining table when it comes to contract time. But boy, does it ever need to be nuanced and specific to construction. So I'm super grateful to see that that's happening, with OCS. I've taken that course. It certainly is so different than, the specificity to it for the sector is so new. It's so needed. It helps. I think it helped for everyone on the same page, that commonality as they head into business for that course. And that's another unique thing, right? I think we overlook it. Like you were talking about things we overlook, the unionized construction sector, we overlook this relationship component between labor and management. And, we use the word tripartite a lot. And I think we forget how fortunate we are to have that opportunity for a tripartite, whether it be labor management and, say, a purchaser or client looking to secure services for construction, whether it be government. That dynamic is incredibly powerful. It's incredibly fortunate, and it helps work on a lot of shared goals that are well beyond just securing the project. And these are the innovations and advancements that union advantage help propel and help play, I would say, speak to.
So picking up on sort of that piece a little bit, and I'm cognizant of time and that sort of stuff. I do want to touch on one other piece, because I do think that relationship and the piece that, as I've already talked about from our fundamentals of construction and labor relations class, is really looking at sort of the relationship, and it's even part of our mandate, the OCS mandate. It's really working to improve that relationship, build kind of those bridges between labor and management, so that ultimately their first time talking isn't at the bargaining table. It starts kind of after the last round of bargaining. Those conversations keep continuing, and it was certainly something that when I came into the OCS, that I saw as a major priority for both Wayne, your predecessor, as well as Mark Arsenault from the provincial building trades, was the two of them worked very hard at making sure that they had a solid relationship, so that, and obviously respecting kind of each other's position and that sort of stuff. I mean, let's face it, in a negotiation, you're always going to have two sides. But bottom line is they saw the value behind it. They saw the power behind having that unified front going towards kind of the advocacy, going towards, talking to potential investors, that sort of stuff, and saying, hey, no, you know what, we're in lockstep together. We're walking together. We're talking together, kind of thing, and making sure that there is that commitment. So, that's one of the things that to me, I thought was, man, that was a major step forward, for the industry in making sure that you had those two parties kind of together, so they did understand it. So, before we kind of close out, I'd just be interested in kind of your quick thoughts on that relationship.
Yeah, well, listen, Wayne did a great job at building quite the relationship with the building trades on behalf of CECCO and the employers that are represented by CECCO. It was rooted in respect. It was rooted in transparency and consistent open dialogue. I intend to fully build upon that. I've seen successes in my own career from that, and I know how critical it is moving forward. Let's be honest, employers and unions aren't always going to agree on everything, that's for sure. That's healthy at the end of the day. But the strength of this ICI sector and unionized construction is our ability to work through these issues together. I'm a big proponent of working on issues outside of bargaining as well as in bargaining, because listen, I know there's a lot that happens, and these collective agreements span decades, and so there's always language cleanups and modernizing articles and language that it may have been written in the 30s and 40s, and we have to address it because it's 2025 and it is different. It applies differently. So lots of language cleanup always happens, but there's always still work to be done in that type of avenue. But in between that, things pop up. If I look back only, that wasn't that long ago, and I hate using the word, but think about COVID, the unique flexibility that existed because of labor management, its collaboration and its ability to work together to solve and tackle these issues. They're able to be leaned upon heavily by the provincial government to tackle these challenges within the industry and allow the industry to still progress, still move forward, and essentially, not shut that down as well as much all the challenges. And I know it wasn't perfect. I mean, for anyone listening to that, there's stories on, what went well, what didn't go well, but that was a constant example of how these two groups, through a strong relationship and open communication, can improve and tackle these challenges. That collaboration is essential, whether it be bargaining, workforce planning, or advocacy. And essentially, we approach these things together with honesty and accountability. Outcomes are always going to be better. I'm going to prioritize that on behalf of CECCO. I'm going to prioritize those relationships, not as a courtesy, but as a strategic necessity. It's the core and the strength of the unionized construction sector. And it's for both the ICI and all sectors.
I think it's a great way to kind of round that out. I think it is one of those pieces that really does highlight the strength of the industry. It's ultimately, and it's interesting to me. So I think it was Graham Aiken in one of our meetings had talked about, we constantly, we look at, we're kind of butting heads almost about the same issue. Workers want more money, contractors want more jobs. It's effectively the same argument kind of thing, just from a different perspective kind of thing. So I think having those discussions early are critically important. So
I see it as an opportunity, Brian. I think if we just take that perspective a little bit, if we work in the thought process together, that when we align our goals together, that the more opportunities, the more jobs, but results in actually more wages and more offer. It's a cycle. It's a wonderful piece that works when we collaborate together. And there's lots of interesting stories of collaborations that have happened to achieve success. And it all comes back to that fundamental piece where labor management have a dialogue, they have a relationship. It has ebbs and flows, it might have ups and downs, but the reality is keeping that communication, keeping those opportunities to solve some problems together are key and critical. And I look forward to trying to keep that energy and spirit alive, and anything I can do to help support and enhance it is going to be a top priority for CECCO.
So with that, Adam, I'd like to thank you for coming on to the podcast. So today I brought Adam on to help support his transition into his new role, but also to help further solidify the cooperative relationship between labor and management, but to also help promote the progressive approach management and labor have been taking towards labor relations. I think there's some real wins there. We saw it in this past bargaining round, and I'd love to see that kind of thing continue. And I think all parties want to see that as well. So I think with that, we will close out today's podcast. I'd like to thank Adam Melnick and the Construction Employers Coordinating Council of Ontario for the time today on OCS Talks. For more information on today's podcast and resources from the Ontario Construction Secretariat, visit our website at iciconstruction.com and follow us on social media. Thank you.
Ontario Construction Secretariat. Knowledge to build on. Visit iciconstruction.com to learn more.